The hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead, the kind of old fluorescent hum that never quite went away. The coastal base was built decades ago, concrete walls stained with salt wind, aluminum doors that stuck in the heat. Dust gathered in corners no one claimed. She moved like she belonged to the quiet. Elena Voss. No rank, no insignia. Just a plain base ID on a faded lanyard and a brown field notebook always tucked beneath her arm. Most didn't notice her. She worked in the far wing, down past the operations center, behind the language annex, in a glass cubicle where voice transcripts scrolled slowly across the screen. At 0600, she'd already finished her second cup of black tea. She typed without pause. No noise, no fanfare. Just one line at a time. The SEAL team passed her by without looking. They moved like they always did, boots firm, clipped conversation, shoulders squared from habit more than effort. They laughed at something one of them said. Something about midnight mic checkers and ghost channels. She kept typing. A faint twitch in her left eyebrow. Nothing more. In the morning briefing, she sat in the back, just outside the overhead lights' full reach. Officers gathered at the front, digital maps flickering behind them, flags, acronyms, theater code names that blurred together after a while. When the visiting liaison from the Joint Command Unit stumbled through a word in dialect, trying to reference a tactical formation, Elena spoke quietly. Not rotation. Spiral offset. He's describing an inward compression. No one turned. The liaison nodded like it was his own correction. She said nothing more. After the meeting, she returned to her glass cubicle. The windows overlooked the outer landing field, where two Ospreys sat cooling in the haze. Fuel teams moved like ants beneath them. Elena watched for a moment, then opened her notebook. The writing inside wasn't linear. No dates. No full sentences. Just short entries, coordinates, fragments. Breakers south at .041. Wind cross cut 12K, no report. Echo 3 still scans first. She folded the book closed, logged into the comms transcript system, and disappeared back into silence. By Thursday, the phrase had repeated twice more. Once on a drone recon overlay. Once buried inside a test drill transcript no one even reviewed. Elena read both lines without blinking. Didn't react. Just circled them, once with a pen, once in her head. Delta Tide 0 mark inbound. Echo 12 responding to Delta Tide marker. Too casual. Too clean. Someone was testing the language, and someone else wasn't paying attention. She ran a passive match on the phrase library. The system returned nothing, standard denial when a term had been deprecated from visibility. She scrolled further, past the green lines, found the old entry. Delta Tide, retired. Use restricted, comms closed, 2017. Prior operational clearance, Echo 3. That last designation sat like a crack in concrete. Echo 3. Her old tag. But it wasn't supposed to exist anymore. At 17:45 she walked across the courtyard toward the relay tower, wind rising off the water, making the antenna rigs hum low. She stepped into the outer tech shed and found the junior tech from earlier, Ramsey, logging equipment checkouts. You've had multiple lines referencing a deactivated code, she said quietly. I think someone's spoofing old protocols. Ramsey looked up, blinking. Delta Tide? He asked, grinning. I saw that too. Probably just some legacy terms. Lot of these guys train off outdated material. It repeated, she said, 3 times. In 3 channels. 2 outside standard drill context, he shrugged. If it's not triggering alerts, it's not our level. She said nothing, then added, it used to be real. Ramsey laughed. Come on. You weren't even around when those ops were running. She didn't answer. He glanced back at his tablet, half amused. You want me to file a flag on it? She hesitated. No, she said. Not yet. But as she turned to leave, she wrote a line beneath the others in her notebook. They're waking it back up. Elena waited until the next day. Early enough to be quiet. Late enough to be deliberate. She walked the long corridor toward the Intel Annex, past half-lit map rooms and static screens that hummed without anyone watching. The command liaison, a captain on temp assignment, was standing near a coffee cart, scrolling through updates. She approached without preamble. There's been layered reuse of a decommissioned code string, she said, voice calm. He glanced at her over the rim of his cup. She continued, Delta Tide. It was retired from operations in 2017 under Tier 3 blackout. It's come up on 3 channels in the last 48 hours. The officer blinked. I haven't seen any report on that. You wouldn't, she said. It wasn't flagged. It was too old. He shifted. And your translation desk? Elena Voss. Not signals? No. He gave her a tight smile, polite, patronizing. You know, we get a lot of fragmentary bleed-throughs. Simulations. Overlapping encryption. If it didn't trip audit, it's not live. She didn't move. It was intentional, she said. You think we're under threat? I think someone's warming up a line they're not supposed to have. The smile faded slightly. Not gone, just replaced with the default officer distance. We appreciate the vigilance. I'll have Tech give it a look. She opened her notebook, turned it toward him. The phrase was written 3 times, underlined once. He didn't read it, didn't even glance down. Miss Voss, we're preparing for an arrival this afternoon. We're at full bandwidth already. If there's concern about chatter noise, log it. Otherwise, leave it to signals. He turned before she could speak again. Walked off. Elena stood alone in the hall. Notebook still open. Wind from a side panel rattled the steel edge of a nearby door. She walked back to her desk slowly. Sat down. Closed the notebook. Wrote one more line before logging off for the day. No one's listening until someone's missing. The C-23 transport touched down late in the day. Dust kicked up from the runway, catching the edge of the wind and drifting in sheets across the cracked concrete. Fuel crews moved into position. A forklift rattled by with gear crates wrapped in dull green netting. No ceremony. Just movement. Elena stood behind the glass of the observation bay, not watching the arrivals, just waiting for a quiet window to upload the next shift's translated logs. The hatch dropped with a metallic groan. 3 SEALs stepped out. 2 ground crew behind them. A 4th figure followed, shoulders squared beneath a half-unzipped flight jacket, gray just starting to run through his beard. Lieutenant Commander Heath Cutter. She hadn't seen him in 12 years, not since the comms blackout. Not since the final relay, when his voice cracked and the transmission cut, and all she could do was keep speaking into silence until the ridge bled out of signal range. She turned instinctively, reflex more than thought. Too late. He saw her. His boots stopped against the tarmac. One hand dropped the duffel. Not tossed, just slipped, like his body forgot to hold on. He stared through the glass. Elena didn't move. Neither did he. Not for several seconds. One of the younger operators said something to him. A quiet question, maybe, but Cutter didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on her. On the plain civilian with no rank, no title, standing behind an empty desk with her field notebook resting beside a keyboard no one noticed. Then he stepped forward. He didn't knock, didn't ask, just opened the door and stood in the entryway like he wasn't sure if he should walk further. She waited. Finally he spoke. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was steady. Neither should you. A flicker crossed his face, not anger. Something older. Something broken open and stitched shut again. I heard your voice, he said. In that final transmission. She nodded once. And then it was gone. I was told to bury it, she said. You. The op myself. He stepped forward, quiet. You didn't bury it. No, she said. I wrote it down. She placed the notebook on the desk between them, turned to a page he couldn't see. Didn't invite him to read it. Didn't need to. Cutter stepped inside, door closing behind him with a dull metallic latch. The room felt smaller now, like the air held something suspended between them, unspoken, unfinished. He didn't look at the notebook. He reached slowly into his duffel, unzipped the side pouch, and pulled out a square of cloth wrapped in plastic, yellowed from years of storage. He laid it on the desk, not pushing it toward her, just placing it. Elena didn't look right away, but she didn't have to. She already knew the shape. A small, black patch, unmarked, unadorned, the edges stitched in a subtle pattern that, to most, meant nothing. But to the ones who carried it, it meant one thing. Echo designation, tier black comms. The kind used by handlers who were embedded in denied operations, where no call sign survived the paperwork and no recording was ever meant to be played again. He spoke softly. You were Echo 3, weren't you? She looked at the patch. Then finally at him. Yes. He let out a breath, but it wasn't relief. It was like pulling the weight of a name back out of the ground. I thought they scrubbed all of you. They did, she said. I just didn't stay buried. He nodded slowly. I remember the voice. Right before extraction went dark, you said. He stopped. She finished it for him. If you can't see the way out, give them your voice. His jaw clenched. That bought us 8 minutes. That's the only reason we cleared the slope. I stayed on the line, she said. I know. Outside, the last crew was finishing offload. Neither of them looked at the window. Cutter's voice dropped lower. Why come back? She paused. Then, because someone's testing the old language again. Delta tide. His head turned, just slightly. You're sure? They've used it 3 times. On unsecured lines, he nodded. Once. Slow. The old silence settled again, the kind that only those who've survived past the debrief know how to carry. Then he slid the patch across the desk, not as a gift, but as a confirmation, and for the first time in 12 years she picked it up, held it in her palm, and didn't let go. The lights in the office dimmed slightly as the storm rolled in. Shadows leaned long across the floor, and the glass behind them blurred with wind-lifted dust. Cutter hadn't sat yet. Elena remained standing too, the black patch still resting in her hand, fingers curled around it like something half-remembered. He spoke without force. Did you stay in it? After Ridge? No, she said. A pause. Then, they said I wasn't standard enough for protocol. Too many ad-libs. Too much instinct. I stayed for the paperwork. Then I left. Left the country? No. Just left the voice. He nodded slowly, like he understood something deeper than what she said. You kept listening anyway. I always did. He looked down. You think it's a test? No, she said. I think it's a breadcrumb. Someone's calling with language only old ears will catch. Quiet enough not to trip alarms. But specific. Cutter exhaled. There were 7 of us left after the Ridge blackout. 3 still active. 1 buried without honors. 2 disappeared. You were the 7th, she said. He nodded. And now, someone's stirring the ash. She said nothing. Instead, she reached for the small watch on her wrist. Worn, old, and slightly off time. She adjusted it 3 ticks backward. Cutter noticed. You kept Zulu -6? He asked. Her answer was almost a whisper. That's when the voice stopped. He stepped closer, resting his knuckles on the desk between them. If I brought you back in, not officially, would you come? Her eyes didn't flicker. I was never out. I just wasn't asked. He reached across, not to shake her hand, but to press something small into her palm. A coin. No insignia. Just a notch carved in the edge. Old comms teams used them. Passed them when it was time to move in silence. She didn't look at it. Just closed her fingers. He walked to the door. Paused before he opened it. You still go by Echo 3? She turned back to the notebook. Now and then, she said. But mostly, I just listen. The next morning, her name was still missing from the rotation sheet. No memo. No orders. Just a silent absence where her badge used to scan in. Elena's desk sat empty. The keyboard was dusted clean. Her notebook, gone. Not a trace left in the logs. Only the watch remained, placed gently at the base of the communications rack. Still ticking. Still set to Zulu -6. In the command tower, the secure comms panel, long dormant, patched over, mostly forgotten, blinked once. Echo Line 3, stand by. No one had seen it live in years. Some techs thought the wiring didn't even connect anymore. But the signal came clear. The mic activated. Just static for a second. Then one voice. Echo 3 online. Reading field drift. Recommends suppression of legacy tags. And tell Cutter, he was right. No signature. No base ID. Just the voice. Calm. Controlled. Unmistakable. Elsewhere on base, Cutter stood at the edge of the runway, hands behind his back. The patch she'd held was now stitched, without approval, into the inside flap of his gear satchel. He didn't smile. But he nodded to the wind, just once. Inside the tower, the new tech on shift asked, Who was that? An older officer nearby didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, She's the one they stopped listening to, until the silence became too loud. That night, the secure channel stayed open. No chatter. No rush. Just space. And at exactly 3:06, Zulu -6, the signal blinked green again. She didn't need orders. She didn't need rank. She had the line. And somewhere out there, someone was still listening.